Hello, class. What we're going to do for this lecture is we're going to start our conversation of personality research methods. We're going to talk about 4 different types of personality data and different ways of assessing personality, and we'll talk about the pros and the cons of all of these different ways of measuring personality. All right, so let's introduce what these 4 are. So I'm going to use, there's many different ways of representing these different types of data. One way that I like to talk about personality data is a way of discussing it by Jack Block and his wife, Jeanne Block, both famous in the study in personality psychology. They've done a lot of longitudinal studies. They have a lot to say about trait theories in personality. We'll encounter some of Jack Block's ideas about trait theories and personality, particularly the Big Five, when we go talk about trait theories. But according to them, 4 major types of data in personality. We've got S data, O data, T data, and L data. What do these stand for? S data is self-report. Self-report, by far the most common way in which we assess personality. Essentially, we ask subjects, hey, on a scale of 1 to 7, what do you think, how much do you agree with the statement, I enjoy spending time with others? On a scale of 1 to 7, how frequently do you get into arguments with other people? So we are asking human beings to report about their personalities. So that's self-report data. Then we have O data. Here we are relying on observer ratings. So this is very similar to self-report, but instead of asking people about their own personalities, we get somebody that's very close to them, maybe their parent, maybe their children, maybe their significant other, to rate their personality. So again, maybe on a scale of 1 to 7, how much does your best friend, how organized is your best friend? So some examples of some observer ratings there. Then we have T data, which is test data. Here, what we do is we present all subjects or all test takers with the same stimulus. Maybe it's something like a Rorschach ink blot test, and we ask them to do the same action. And based off of how they respond, we interpret something about their personality. We'll talk about the specifics of test data a little bit later on in this lecture. And then finally, we have L data, which is life outcome data. We see something, how you live your life, and we make an inference about your personality based off of that. So how clean or messy is your room? What does this tell us about your personality? Maybe we look at your Facebook account or your TikTok or your Snapchat and see how many times you post, what are you posting about, how many pictures of food do you have on your social media, and we infer something about your personality based off of those particular life kinds of data. So those are the different kinds of data. What are the pros and the cons of all of these? What are some of the more nitty-gritty of these? First, let's talk about self-report. So self-report, as I mentioned before, is by far the easiest way to collect personality data. It is by far the most common way of assessing personality. Why? All you need is a pen and a paper. All you need is access to the internet, and you can easily give somebody some kind of quiz or personality test type thing. When we take personality tests, the vast majority of time we're taking self-report kinds of measures. There are 2 major forms of self-report. So we have unstructured self-report and we have structured self-report. Unstructured self-report, these are open-ended questions where we're expecting the subject or the test taker to write us a paragraph or a sentence describing something. So maybe we might ask them, what is your favorite part of your job? Maybe we ask them, what is your most well-defined attribute? What do other people say about you? So we are expecting them to write a sentence or a paragraph in response to these answers. Now, the advantage of this is we get a wealth of data. We get a very nuanced answer from a person. We could think about maybe a structured self-report kind of question. How well do you like your job? on a scale of 1 to 7. Now, based off of what they put, they might really like their job or they might not really like their job, but you don't know why they like or don't like their job. Whereas for an unstructured self-report, you can get that answer. You get the specifics from the human being. We can contrast this with a structured self-report. Here, there is a finite set of responses that the test taker can endorse. So, do you like outdoor activities? True or false? So you either respond true or you respond false. There's no other choices. Another example of this, as we've mentioned before, the Likert type scale. And again, this is Likert, not Likert. On a Likert scale, maybe how organized are you from 1 to 7? How do you have high standards? Do you strongly disagree, somewhat disagree, no opinion, somewhat agree, strongly agree? Since there's 5 different answer choices, this is a 5-point Likert scale. So with the unstructured self-reports, one disadvantage to them is it's really difficult to statistically analyze this data. So what's the average response? Well, you really can't take an average of a paragraph. And sometimes it's very difficult if you've got a ton of different people responding to get a general consensus of what are the common problems that people are reporting, what are the common things that people are saying when you're asking these questions. You can't just count them up like you can very easily with a structured self-report. So there's a disadvantage of how do you interpret these unstructured self-reports. Okay, you could do something like a word cloud type thing, but a word cloud might describe something, but doesn't do a very good job of truly analyzing what it is people are saying. Structured self-reports, on the other hand, we can take the mean of our 5-point Likert scale and find that someone might have an average of a 2.5 on a question, or human beings in general have an average of 2.5 on a question. We can easily calculate someone's personality score numerically with a structured self-report. So many times we are going to rely on structured self-reports because they're just easier to analyze. They're more objective in coming up with particular personality scores, whereas there's a lot more interpretation involved with an unstructured self-report. However, with an unstructured self-report, we get a vast majority more data and we get more nuance. So there's some pros and cons to both of these types of self-reports. But how about self-reports in general? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? Well, first of all, the data is very easy to collect. It's easy to collect, easy to administer. We can put these tests online. All we need is a pen and a paper. That's a cheap way of doing a psychology study. So very easy to put this stuff online. And another thing that goes along with easy to administer, they're very cheap. I mean, some tests that are intellectual property cost you some money to administer, but for the most part, pen and paper is not that expensive. Now, if we're talking about some kind of test data where we're looking at brain activity, now an EEG or an MRI is going to cost us a lot of money. It's going to be very difficult to administer that kind of test because you've got to get somebody inside a giant magnet for an MRI to work. So self-reports are just a whole lot easier than these. So another advantage of self-report is who knows you better than yourself? You have been around you your entire life. So you have more evidence that supports what your personality is truly like compared to your parents, compared to your friends, compared maybe to your significant other. You know what's going on inside your head. No one else knows exactly what you're thinking. So since you have all this information, you are the person that's probably most well equipped to answer questions about your own personality. Another advantage of self-reports is theoretically it's easy to go from the answers that someone endorses to what their personality is. If on a 7-point scale you say a 7 for I enjoy going out to social events, well, it's easy to say that you're an extroverted individual. If for a projective test, you say that the Rorschach-Inkblot test looks like a piglet, how do we tell what that means about your personality? It's hard to explain. Maybe we have some extra activity for you compared to other people in your frontal lobes. What does this tell us about your personality? It's hard to interpret that kind of data in terms of personality, whereas the answers that you endorse, it's very easy or easier to explain what personality traits you have, what your personality is like, based off of the answers that you endorse on these personality tests. In case some particular affective individual differences, some personality traits, some characteristics of personality that we're interested in are by nature true based off of the self-report. Your self-esteem is defined by how you feel about yourself. Do you like yourself? Do you not like yourself? Well, that is self-report by nature. There is no better way of measuring your self-report than just to ask you, because your interpretation of your self-report or your interpretation of your self-esteem is, by definition, your self-esteem. So for some things, self-report is, by nature, the thing that we're interested in. Another advantage, although it's a smaller advantage, based off of what people respond, people are going to act in accordance to how they believe their personality is. So if they report that they are highly organized, they're likely to behave in ways to try to verify how they responded. They say, yes, I'm organized, that's going to lead kind of to a self-fulfilling prophecy where they're going to behave in a more organized fashion. If they say that they're a very shy individual, that they don't like trying new things, well, they're less likely to try things in the future. So just based off of them answering the question, they're likely to try to verify the answers that they endorsed on that questionnaire. So there's some advantages for self-report, and a lot of these are very practical reasons why we would go with the self-report. But think for yourself here for a second. Think about some potential problems that we have of self-report. Okay, why would we not always use self-report? So take a second to think about that yourselves, and let's go over some particular problems with self-report. First one is the problem of social desirability, or the problem of socially desirable responding. People want to seem like good human beings. Okay, people might lie on a personality test to make themselves seem better than they actually are. So let's say that you're applying for a job. You want to be a waiter or a waitress, or whatever job you're thinking about applying. And on there, when you apply, you take a personality test and then ask on that test, are you an aggressive individual? Do you punch other people? Now, you're going to say no. And you should say no, regardless of are you an aggressive individual. You always should say no because you want that job. Okay, that question really isn't there to determine your personality. It's trying to determine, are you stupid enough to endorse the answer? Yeah, I hate other people, but I want to be a waiter nonetheless, or waitress. So that's why they include that test. But there's this problem of social desirable responding in which people might not give an honest assessment of what their personality is truly like, especially if they're applying for a job, especially if that personality test is used in some way for job selection or selecting what kind of career you're going to what kind of career path you need to go to, or so forth. So people might lie to try to make themselves seem better than what they really are. They might try to lie to be more agreeable, less anxious, more open to new ideas. So that's a huge problem with self-report. People have an interest in making themselves seem better than what they really are. So we need to find a way to get rid of this problem, or at least address this problem. So as I mentioned, in the setting of a job, people are very likely for job applications when they take personality tests to lie on those. And I would argue that that's a good thing. Well, not a good thing for the employer, not a good thing for the science, but a great thing for the person taking the test. Yes, if you're going for a job, yeah, lie on your personality exam. You want to make it seem like you're a better human being, so you get the job. All right. But don't do that for research studies. Okay, research studies that you're not being evaluated with, no, do the correct answers or be accurate. All right, another problem. And this is the bane of some of my existence as far as research is concerned whenever we do self-report type things. Acquiescence response bias. This is where our subjects are lazy, that they don't care about the experiment or the research study, and they might mark all 5s, or they might mark all 1s, or they might mark all 3s, or maybe they just draw us a pretty Christmas tree on their test form. Now, this data is completely useless because they have not read the questions. They have put the minimal amount of attention into the personality questionnaire. How do we stop this? How do we get people to respond with their attention, like attentively, right? How do we get them, or how do we identify people when they are not taking our tests seriously so we can remove them from the data analysis? Would be a huge problem with our data if we had some individuals in there that were just marking random answers. We're less likely to find the effects that we're looking for. So how do we identify individuals that have an acquiesced response set that are not taking our study seriously? And here is our last problem with self-report, and this is a very important problem, but it's a little bit difficult to understand, so we're going to try to explain this for you guys. So can people ever truly know what their personality is? Can they ever objectively go inside their head and think about what their personality is like? People are not the best at this. Many mental processes are occurring unconsciously, are occurring implicitly. It's kind of hard for you to think about your own thinking without already influencing your own thinking. So self-reports, people might not actually know what's going on in their head when they're making certain decisions. They might not know the real reason why they do the things that they do. There is a very influential paper in psychology, and this is one of those papers that I would argue anybody that wants a degree in psychology needs to read this paper, and I'll drop it in the optional readings. It's a bit long, but one of those great all-time papers by Nesbitt and Wilson, and it's called Telling More Than We Know, Verbal Reports on Mental Processes. And Nesbitt and Wilson are arguing about the effectiveness of self-reports. So they report many different studies that have been conducted over the years. They report some of the studies that they have conducted themselves, in which they ask people to make a decision, and then they ask them, what is the reason that you made that decision? And they identify reasons why people make those decisions and see if they are correctly able at identifying why they decided these certain things. So let me give you some examples of what they have in this paper. So people don't always have knowledge about why they make the decisions that they do. So Nesbitt and Wilson conducted this study where they sit people down. It's a consumer type study, or they make it seem like it's a consumer study. And they ask you, which of these socks is the best? Which of these socks do you think is the best? Now, sometimes the socks are different. Sometimes, like this time, the socks might all be the same. And you have to pick which sock is the best. And then you have to explain why that sock is your favorite sock. Now, for the example that we have here, all the socks are exactly the same. There's no reason why you should pick sock 4 compared to sock 1. They're the same. And yet, when people selected these socks, they would say something along the lines of, this sock smells nicer, this sock is of higher quality than this other sock. They would make up a reason, but the socks were identical. What Nesbitt and Wilson did is they switched the ordering of these socks, where sometimes sock 1 was in the spot of sock 3 and so forth. And what they found is that people have a slight preference for the sock to the far right. Whatever it is, people like the object that's on the far right the best. Now, it's a small effect, but people are more likely to vote for the option on the far right. And it doesn't matter if we're looking at socks, if we're looking at laundry detergents, if we're looking at air fresheners, if we're looking at cheeseburgers, whatever it is, the thing on the far right, people are more likely to endorse or say is the best. Now, this could be for a variety of things. One, English speakers read from left to right. the thing on the farthest right is the one that you probably looked at the most recently. So there probably is a recency effect here. But that's not what we're interested in here. What we're interested in here is that nobody reported that the reason that they selected the sock is because it was the one to the farthest right. No one said, hey, yo, I picked that sock because it was the last one I saw. No one said that, even though experimentally it does have an effect, the position of the sock. No one was able to identify that that might have been a reason why they selected that sock. People do not have access to why they are making the decisions that they do. All right, so no subject mentioned that the position of the sock might have caused them to select that sock. So we're not always aware why we make certain decisions. Let's do one more study from Nesbitt and Wilson. All right, subjects are going to perform this task, and after this task, we're going to ask them, what is their favorite laundry detergent? So we get them to do this task, and words are presented subliminally. So they're presented so fast that people consciously do not recognize what the word says. They can't tell you what the word says, but their brain has processed it. In one condition, there are control words, so you might see the words monkey and dolphin, but so quickly that you don't know that those are the words that you see. And in another condition, subjects saw the words moon and gravity. Again, very, very quickly, they couldn't consciously tell you what words they saw. But after they were presented with these things subliminally, subjects were asked what's their favorite laundry detergent, and subjects that were presented with moon and gravity were more likely to say that their favorite laundry detergent is Tide. So Tide, the tides are related to both the moon and gravity. But when we ask these subjects why is Tide their favorite laundry detergent, they said, well, because it is the freshest, because it is the cleanest, because it's the least expensive, because a variety of other reasons. They listed why Tide was their favorite. Not a single one of them said, hey, it's because you subliminally presented me with moon and gravity, and that made me think of tides, and so Tide was on my mind, and so that's the one that popped in, and that's the one that I said. So even though this subliminal presentation had an impact on what laundry detergent they said was the best, no one reported that that was the reason. The point, so why am I talking about these consumer studies of Nesbitt and Wilson's? How does this impact self-report and personality? Subjects might not have access to what their personality is. Subjects might think that they are perfectly within the realm of being normal, when in fact they might be overly aggressive. It's, someone might rationalize it, well, everybody else is out to get me. It just makes sense that I get into so many arguments, when in fact they might be a very argumentative person. They just don't realize it. They just cannot really think about what's going on in their head. Okay, so people don't really know 100% of what's going on when they make the decisions that they do, when they have the certain emotions that they do. So they might not be able, even if they're trying 100% with all their attention, trying to be as honest as possible, even if those things are true, they might not give us their true personality because they just don't know what it is. So there's many things that might impact how we make a certain decision on a self-report questionnaire. So if we say, are you an agreeable person? Well, sometimes you behave in an agreeable fashion, sometimes you don't. If on that morning that you took the test, you gave some money to a charity, you might think that you are more agreeable because you helped somebody recently. If you are on your way to take a personality test and you yelled at somebody the morning of, you might think of yourself as less agreeable just because of what recently happened to you. Another important component here is, who are we comparing ourselves to when we answer these questions? Let's say the self-report question, are you a nice human being? If you're comparing yourself to people that have committed murder, people that have committed a lot of violent crimes, you might think to yourself, I'm a very nice individual. I've only yelled at people. I have never killed anybody. I'm doing good. That might be how you answer your question. You say that you're very agreeable, you're very nice, when maybe objectively you're not that nice. Maybe if we are asking the question, are you a nice person? You compare yourself to Tibetan monks or saints or people that are very, very nice. And in this situation, you might think of yourself as very, very mean or very mean-spirited. And you might report that when in actuality, you might not actually be that disagreeable. So who are we comparing ourselves to? How do we interpret the question? What recently happened in our lives? These are all things that are going to change how we respond on these self-report measures. Now, how do we deal with these problems of social desirability, acquiescence response bias, and the fact that people might not actually know what their personalities are, even if they tried? So social desirability, there's a few ways in our personality test that we can try to examine this. One easy thing to do is to include a lie scale. So we include questions that if you were to endorse, if you were to say true to them, they're just so outrageous that there's no way everybody is that good or that nice or that hardworking. So we might ask the question, have you ever lied? Pretty much everybody in their life has lied at one point in time. If you say, I have never lied, never in my entire life, it's probably the case that you're lying at that point in time. How about the question, sometimes I feel bad about things I have done? Everybody at some point in time has had some regrets. So if you say, I've never lied, I've never had any regrets, a few things like this, it's probably the case that you're lying to us. It's probably the case that we are dealing with a social, we're dealing with social desirability, socially desirable responding. So we can do a few things. One thing that we can do is eliminate that subject from our data analysis. We could do that. It's not very sophisticated. Another thing that we can do is we can try to control for that individual's socially desirable responding and try to statistically control for that in their results. And there's some ways that we can do that with some advanced statistics. Another thing that we can do is include a social desirability scale. And a good example of this is the Marlowe-Crown social desirability scale. This one is used quite frequently in personality research and in social psychology research. It's a 33-item true-false questionnaire. So some questions that might be included in here. I never hesitate to go out of my way to help someone in trouble. Everybody hesitates in some way to help someone in trouble at some point in time. Never is a strong word here. So if you endorse this, you're probably lying. You're probably high on social desirability. You're probably trying to make it yourself out to be better than what you really are. It is sometimes hard for me to go on with my work if I'm not encouraged. Okay, everybody sometimes has trouble with their work if they're not encouraged. So if you endorse this item and you endorse a number of items similar to this, you're probably trying to make it seem like you're a better person than what you really are. There's probably a problem with social desirability. You're probably lying to us. We need to think of what to do with the data, whether or not we eliminate your data, whether or not we statistically control for the amount of BS that you're giving us. All right, how do we get rid of lazy people? How do we get rid of acquiescence response set? There's a few creative ways of doing this. One fairly simple way, and something that we always want to include on any of our self-report measures, especially Likert type items, is to include reverse coded questions. Reverse coded questions are questions in which, let's say that we have a measure of how hardworking you are. If a 5 means the most hardworking and a 1 means the least hardworking, we want to have some questions where it's flipped, where the 1 means that you're the most hardworking. I have a very dumb example of here, but you might include the item, I love going to parties, agree or disagree. And then I hate going to parties, agree or disagree. If our subject is circling agree all the time, what that's going to do is, instead of having a very extreme score where they're really high on extroversion or how hardworking they are, it's going to put them smack dab in the middle if we have an equal number of reverse coded items. So they're less likely to impact our data if we include an equal number of reverse coded items. Another thing that we can do is we can compare the number of items that they respond one way when it's asked this way and see if they respond the opposite way when we ask it in the reverse coded way. So we might do something along these lines to make a comparison where, well, earlier on the experiment, you said that you like parties, and now you say that you don't like parties. Well, there's this disagreement. Because there's this amount of disagreement, do we remove your data from the study, or do we do something else with your data? So including reverse scored items is always a good idea. Another thing that we can do is to include some catch questions within our test or questionnaire. So we include something like, if you are paying attention, mark 1 on this item. And this is a good thing to make sure that our subjects are paying attention. I had a colleague at Georgia Tech, and what they were doing a very long study on attraction. So they would show you 2 faces, and you had to rate which face was the most attractive. What is it, this face or this face? So it was a long study, and sometimes people got bored, and so what they would do is they would sit back and keep pressing the same key over and over and over again, and you would get really bad data. So what these colleagues of mine did is they would take some of the items that were early on in the test, and at the very end of the test, repeat the exact same items to see if people responded the same way in the last half of the experiment that they did in the first half of the experiment. Now, if they responded in the same way, they're paying attention. If they responded differently over enough items in the first half of the experiment and the last half of the experiment, it's probably the case that they were not paying attention. So again, we can remove them from our data. Or if we are being particularly sadistic, and I've seen this happen before and I love it, we tell them, hey, you're not paying attention. You got to do the experiment all over again. Okay, you thought you were going to be out of here in 30 minutes. Guess what? You're going to be here another hour because you're not paying attention. So sometimes you could do something along those lines. That one's a little bit mean, but you know, if you're going to give us crappy data, don't do it. So we might do some things like that to catch people that are being lazy, that have the acquiescence response bias, and to maybe control for this kind of data impacting the results of our study. What do we do about the third problem here? The people might not have true access to their personality. Not much we can do as far as test construction is concerned. So let's ask this question. Which of the following question types is better, a true-false or a 5-point Likert scale? I typically poll the class, get people to raise their hands. Typically here, people raise their hands for the 5-point Likert scale. And the explanation that they give me is there's more options. There's more options. What happens if you're smack dab in the middle? You can't respond true, you can't respond false. But if you have a 5-point Likert scale, you might be able to put the middle response. Maybe you are moderately high in this trait. Well, with the 5-point Likert scale, you're able to put a moderate option. You moderately agree with this thing. And all of these are good reasons for wanting a 5-point Likert scale as opposed to a 5-point Likert scale as opposed to a true-false. Okay, how about a 5-point or 7-point? Well, someone might say that the 7-point is better because now you have even more options. But then I give a extreme example, something like, why not use a 1,000-point Likert scale? Why would you not do that? There's many more points in the 1,000-point Likert scale than there is in the 5 or 7. But what you get into there is it's impossible for human beings to distinguish the difference between a 65 and a 66 point on a 1,000-point Likert scale. We don't know what the difference between that would be. We can't make a psychological distinction between those 2 points. And because we can't do that, the 1,000-point Likert scale is not very useful. So we want to have as many categories as human beings can make psychological distinctions among people's personality. If that's 5, go with 5. If that's 7, go with 7. It just depends on how well people can divvy up what human beings' personalities are like, how many different categories they can accurately identify people in. And ultimately, what it what it comes down to is we might run the test multiple ways with a 5-point Likert scale, with a 7-point Likert scale, and then we evaluate how well the test works. We look at things like the test reliability, the test validity, things that we're going to be talking about in module 3, to see whether or not that test works. Sometimes a true-false test is the only way to get a test to work. So, for instance, the Marlowe-Crown social desirability scale that we were just talking about, this would only work if we had a true-false kind of questions. So, do we go with the 5-point? Do we go with the true-false? Do we go with the 7-point? Ultimately, we evaluate our test and see which one of those options works the best for us, which one of those has the best reliability, which one of those has the best validity. It depends on how many distinctions someone can make about other people's personalities. So ultimately, we rely on empirical data. We look at the data when we are norming a test, when we are creating the test, and this is going to provide us with the answer as to how many categories we have for our personality test questions. If this is something that you're interested in, and a whole lot more stuff, there is a wonderful class called Testing and Assessment. It's a class that you talk about a lot of psychological tests. You talk about a discipline of statistics known as psychometrics, which is all about measuring psychological phenomenon. And this class is being taught by Dr. Amanda Halliburton. I'd strongly recommend this class, especially if you are interested in going into clinical and counseling psychology. Testing is a huge component of those disciplines. So it would be a very useful class for those of you that are interested in that discipline. Okay, one more problem here with self-reports. Another problem with self-reports, especially if we have a Likert type scale, this is known in statistics as having an ordinal scale of measurement. So what does an ordinal scale of measurement mean? An ordinal scale is a scale of measurement in that we know that if a number is bigger than another number, we know that the bigger number is better than the lower number. But we don't know if the magnitude between, for instance, a 2 and a 3 is the same between a 3 and a 4. Let me give you an example of this. Let me pull out my marker here. Let's say that we're looking at places in a race. So we're going to draw here a line. We're going to think of this line as referring to time. And we have 3 people that finished this race that came in first, second, and third. Now, the first place person finished this quickly, and there is an equal amount of time between the first place person and the second place person compared to the second place person and the third place. So it might be the case that 2 minutes passed since the first place person to the second place person, 2 minutes passed since the second place person to the third place person. That could be the case. However, it could also be the case that there was a photo finish. That person that came in first place and the person that came in second place are very close to one another. It's a photo finish. And the person that came in third took, another 5 minutes, another 10 minutes. If we just have their places, first, second, and third, we don't know which one of these is correct. We don't know how close 1 is to 2. We don't know how close 2 is to 3. The same thing goes for personality items. We don't know if it's the case that, let's say we have a 5-point Likert scale. If you endorse a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5, if they are equal distance in your personality compared to when you endorse these items. Or perhaps it's the case that it takes a lot for you to endorse a 1 and a lot for you to endorse a 5. Okay, let's clear these let me give you some examples of this. So it's an ordinal scale of measurement. For an ordinal scale of measurement, we know that the numbers indicate that this score is higher than this one, but we don't know if the difference between those scores is the same between a 1 and a 2 compared to a 3 and a 4 or a 4 and a 5. We don't know if the intervals are equivalent psychologically for an ordinal scale of measurement. So this is my example of runners. We might have their places, but we don't know psychologically if or here time-wise if the difference between first and second place is the same as the time between second and third. It's the same way when we're looking at a Likert type scale. Additionally, all subjects, not only is this an ordinal scale, but subjects might put these category boundaries as to whether or not they endorse a 3 or a 4 differently than somebody else. This is a very difficult concept to explain, but it's very important for us to understand this with self-reports. So let me give you an example and try to visually show you what's going on. So let's say that we have the personality question. I like to hike in the mountains, true or false? And let's say that this is normally distributed. It's normally distributed. Most people kind of like to hike in the mountains. There's some people that want to climb Mount Everest, and there's some people like me that a little bit of an incline, I'm like, don't want to. Okay, so I like to hike in the mountains. It's probably normally distributed. Now, when you make the decision, true, false, do you like to hike in the mountains? Do you not like to hike in the mountains? Maybe it's the case that you set it smack dab in the middle here. That if you feel that you're over on this side, you're going to put true. If you feel that you're over on this side, you're going to put false. But there's nothing telling you that you need to put this category boundary right here. Maybe you interpret the question a little bit differently than other test takers. Maybe when I ask you, do you like to hike in the mountains? You're thinking mountains like, I don't know, really tall mountains, like the Rockies, like climbing Mount Everest. If this is what you're thinking a hike in the mountains looks like, maybe you set your category boundary to be more conservative. It's going to take you to be really far on this end of the spectrum for you to say, yes, I enjoy hiking up mountains. Or maybe you interpret this question a little bit differently. Maybe you think a hike in the mountains is relatively flat. If this is your idea of a hike in the mountains, maybe you're going to be more liberal. You're going to be more likely to endorse true than false. So if people report true and report false, we don't know where they set their category boundaries. Is it over here? I don't know why I'm pointing to my screen. Let me use my mouse clicker. Do they put their cutoff over here? Do they put their cutoff over here? Do they put their cutoff over here? We don't know. They might interpret that question differently depending on who they are, how they read that question. And that's one category boundary with a true-false questionnaire. One more point that I want to make. Let's say that you are smack dab in the middle. You're smack dab in the middle. You're average in how much you like to hike up mountains. If you interpret the question like this, that the mountains are really steep, you're going to say false. I don't enjoy hiking up mountains. However, again, you're smack dab in the middle. Over here, you're going to say true. Even though your personality, what you like, has not changed. Based off of how you interpret the question, you were giving me a different response. That's tricky. It's going to cause some error in our measurement just based off of how people read the questions, based off of how they set these category boundaries. And it gets even more complicated when we have a 5-point Likert scale or a 7-point Likert scale. Here we've got 4 different category boundaries. Maybe you have to be over here for you to say 1, here between these 2 points for 2, these 2 points to say 3, here 4, here 5. You might set your category boundaries right here. Or you might do it something like this. Notice here, like let's say that you're right on this line right here. So if you set your category boundaries like this, you are a 3. If you set your category boundaries like this, you Oh, here you're a 5, I'm sorry. Here you're a 3. So depending on how you set these category boundaries, how you interpret these questions, whether or not you're more conservative to give a 1 or a 5, or more liberal to give a 1 and a 5, you're going to give us different you're going to respond differently than everybody else that's taken that test. And there's not much that we can do to control for that. It's just going to be some error in our measurement. So that's a difficult problem to encounter. That's a difficult problem to deal with, but I wanted to mention that to you because it is something that we need to be concerned about. All right, let's take a break for right now, and I will wrap up observer ratings, test data, and life outcome data in the next video. All right, thank you guys, and I will see you in the next video.